President, I have a few remarks to make, although I agree with much of what the member for Murchison has just put on the record. We had similar thoughts, I think, on a number of those things, so let me just pick up on a few of them. At the outset, I think it's worth noting that there doesn't appear to be anything untoward or suspicious regarding these two supply bills, number 3 and 4, and no reason to dispute the government's reasoning for their necessity. Clearly, given the identified ongoing uncertainty due to COVID-19 pandemic and the need to be prepared for the risk of going into a snap lockdown, we need to ensure we can keep paying our hard-working public servants, our essential frontline workers, and keep providing the services that Tasmanians rely upon. Nobody's disputing that, I believe. Also, it's worth acknowledging the government did attempt to provide a courtesy heads-up that not only would they be asking Parliament to consider these two supply bills prior to the established appropriation bill processes, but to also allow the highly irregular and arguably undemocratic rushing through of these bills to the extent of tabling, debating and passing the bills in one sitting day. As I said, we were provided with that prior notification. The bills and their support information and the reasoning alongside them was provided via email at approximately 4 p.m. on Friday, the 20th of August. That's last Friday to us. The public, however, via the media, were notified of this irregular request that was coming to Parliament on Monday. They were notified on Monday of this irregular request. That was the day before the resumption of Parliament and the expected debate on these bills in the other place. However, and I'm not really aware though, and I might be corrected, that the public didn't have access to those bills prior to them being tabled and debated on that same day. They were tabled, they were debated, and although it had been put into the public domain they were coming, they themselves weren't available. Now, this gets me to the point that I think really needs to be made here, that no matter whether the intention is good or not, a rushed and unnecessarily secretive process here in this Parliament is problematic.
Through you, Mr President, the secretive process, I just object a little bit to. This was an emergency to take care of an emergency plan that was here and now. It wasn't worked on for months and months and then introduced.
If I may continue then. The withholding of information from the public is the antithesis of an open, transparent and accountable government, no matter how genuine and good intentions may be. Yes, it may only have been 3 days since MPs, since we were provided with the bills and with the justification for the irregular and extraordinary processes which see the bills debated and passed on the same day. But the principle here is important. This approach, unfortunately, makes the rest of us here in this place complicit in what I think is an undemocratic process. Because we were provided earlier access, we were taken into the government's confidence to some degree, and it's unclear to me why the Tasmanian people couldn't also have been taken into the government's confidence at the same time. Why not put it into the public domain on that same day that it was provided to us? Yes, it was a matter of a couple of days, but it's a principle that democracy is open and transparent. So the point that I want to emphasise and request that the government seriously consider is that, yes, the ongoing nature of the pandemic and the serious risks of Tasmanians being plunged into lockdown does provide challenges, extraordinary ones that have to be tackled. And yes, we as a parliament need to be prepared and we need to be flexible. But it's imperative that we still deliver on those fundamental democratic parliamentary principles, rather than just resorting to shorthand ways of getting around them, as if those principles are expendable inconveniences. In fact, I think we need to make an effort and be seen to overtly be making an effort to demonstrably be delivering open and transparent governance at these extraordinary times under these significant challenges. So the manner in which these supply bills are being dealt with cannot be considered, I think, to represent a precedent or a prototype should the government find itself in a legislative bind due to the pandemic disruptions at some further point down the track. And again, to reiterate, I do not dispute the genuine intent of the government to secure essential supply with these bills. However, I do hold reservations over the current process, and I warn that the support for Parliament for the passage of these supply bills should not be interpreted by the government as an endorsement of this process as some sort of precedent for future pandemic-related reasons to rush legislation through this place. Instead, this situation and the identified need to be prudent highlights that the next step the government should already be considering as part of its COVID lockdown planning. That step, Mr President, clearly should be to work with other MPs and MLCs here in this place on how to keep the Tasmanian Parliament functioning appropriately and safely should a lockdown be required. There are other examples, nationally and internationally, of, say, quorum-only parliaments or parliamentary sessions being held remotely, etc. Today's debate isn't the forum for us to resolve the specifics of what that could look like. However, given that today's debate is being conducted on the premise that we need to be prepared for the likelihood of our parliamentary schedule being disrupted again by a lockdown, it's reasonable to expect that the government must also be preparing to safeguard the functioning of our parliament more broadly in the case of that eventuality. Members here would recall that this chamber did vote last year in support of the establishment of a Joint House Select COVID-19 Response and Recovery Committee, which unfortunately didn't receive government support in the other place and therefore didn't get up. But suffice to say, this rushed debate today on supply bills outside the standard appropriation process illustrates one of the reasons that that committee was, in my opinion, necessary and remains necessary. How to maintain democratic and responsive parliamentary scrutiny during a lockdown is another reason it remains necessary. We are now 18 months into this pandemic, Mr President. One of its first impacts 18 months ago was to shut down this place, our parliament, the foundation of our democracy, for a period of time during which the Tasmanian people were deprived of their right of democratic representation. When Parliament is shut down, we are effectively operating in a dictatorship. The primary mechanism by which we hold government of the day to account is not available in that circumstance, and our representative democracy is not in operation. While many may regard it, what occurred, as a benevolent dictatorship, perhaps, and not observe any overt or inappropriate misuse of power during the times we've seen, without our parliament in operation, it is a dictatorship nonetheless. And it's necessary that we remain in a situation in which the risk of a parliamentary... It's unnecessary, that we remain in this situation in which the risk of a parliamentary shutdown still hangs over our heads. While our focus today is on continuing our financial arrangements so that they can operate during a possible COVID shutdown, it's important and necessary, I have to question, why we haven't also then seen this government presenting Parliament with a plan. Where is the plan, Mr President, and potentially the associated legislation to give effect to that plan to put in place arrangements for Parliament functioning during a lockdown period? Where is the demonstration from this government that it regards the full functioning of our parliamentary democracy as a matter of utmost priority? Let me remind us here that in our system of parliamentary democracy, Parliament is supreme. The executive is answerable to Parliament. If, through this government's neglect to plan and legislate for alternative arrangements, this Parliament then is shut down for potentially an extended period of time, the state of Tasmania will be operating under a dictatorship again. A dictatorship that has been facilitated, whether by design or neglect, by this government. I call on the government then today to demonstrate immediately that it is not in the business of securing unfettered power for itself. I call on the government to present forthwith its plan to secure instead the proper and effective functioning of our Parliament in these uncertain times.
Question is the bill be read.